Hello everyone, and welcome back to another review. And in today's video, I will be reviewing X-Men Days of Future Past. Okay, so this movie was pretty good. It got really confusing towards the end, and there were problems with Mystique in this movie as well, but I'll go into the good stuff first. I gotta say, all the action scenes were really well done in this movie. Every single action scene was really entertaining and did have high stakes, which I guess I should talk about now. For me, this movie had very high stakes, and it did it very well. So, there's this war going on in the future, and mutants are being hunted and killed. The only way to stop this war from ever happening is to have Wolverine basically travel back in time. The way it's explained in this movie is that this character named Kitty Pryde can transfer people's consciousness to the past. The only problem with this is that she can only transfer people's minds back a few weeks, and that if she were to do it for any longer, that it would kill the person that she's trying to do this to. Originally, Professor X was going to be the one to do this, but because he can't, Wolverine steps up and volunteers to do this because he can heal at a rapid rate. The reason why this makes the stakes really high is the fact that if Wolverine cannot complete the mission, then all of our favorite heroes will die. I know you would think, well, that doesn't raise the stakes at all, because we all know they're going to win. Well, in fact, in the beginning of the movie, they actually show most of the X-Men being killed. After they were originally killed, Kitty does her little mind thing, and does travel back in time where our X-Men are still alive. At the very end of the movie, they actually show some of our heroes dying, including Storm. I also really like the fact that they managed to get the original cast members to play our favorite X-Men heroes. I'm really glad that they didn't decide to recast them, because that would have made this really bad, but luckily they did not. I have to point out my favorite scene in this movie, and that was with Peter Maximoff. He is absolutely my favorite character besides Wolverine. In my opinion, he's the perfect casting for this role as well. Really, my favorite part of this scene where Peter had to save Professor X, Magneto, and Wolverine from being captured, basically. Peter is very fast, so this means that he can basically stop time for himself at least. And what this means is that he was able to save everybody pretty quick. To me, this scene is the best representation of somebody with super speed. No other movie seems to capture super speed very well, even the MCU. But Fox had it right, where they show the perspective of the person with super speed instead of their perspective of everyone else. It's kind of boring in other media where they show somebody with super speed and they show them from a different perspective and not from the speedster's perspective. What it usually means is that we either use a streak of color, or we don't know what they're doing, or they don't seem to be running fast enough. I really hope if they ever bring back Quicksilver, that they know how to show his super speed better. I also really like the last part of the movie, where Magneto literally lifts up a baseball stadium, and basically traps the White House inside of it. I just love seeing Magneto's absolute power, and this just shows how powerful he truly is. Now, I'm going to tell you more of the parts that I really didn't agree with, or really confused me. So I'm going to talk about the time traveling part of this first. Before I go forward, I just want to say that the best way that time travel was explained in my opinion was in Avengers Endgame. I know I'm not a scientist or a physicist, but that was the best explanation that was given in a movie for time travel. In this movie, it's not explained very well. What would have made it probably better and less confusing was if they told us what year the future was in and what year it was after Wolverine completed the mission. I kind of understood the basis where Wolverine had his consciousness transferred from the future back to 1973 version of him, and that made complete sense to me. And the only time they ever allude to what year the future is in a scene where they said that the last 50 years will be forgotten if you complete this mission, which means that the future is in the year 2023. So this means that a lot of time jumps were made between these movies. I know this part of the video is probably going to be very confusing. I'm aware of this. I'm also confused as well, but I'm just trying to explain this as well as I can possibly can. So if it is established that the last 50 years would have been forgotten, then why did Wolverine wake up in like the early 2000s? I'm not saying for sure that he woke up back in the early 2000s, but because the first X-Men movies were released in the early 2000s, and they had the characters from those movies at the very end where Wolverine woke up, I can only assume that it was the early 2000s. This is where it gets confusing, because if the last 50 years were all forgotten about, then why did Wolverine not wake up 50 years before? You see, this is why it's confusing, because there are so many contradictions, and this is why time travel is not usually a good storyline. Okay, so this review was a little short, wasn't it? Honestly, for me, there is nothing really to talk about with this movie, and I personally enjoyed it just for the entertainment factor. But the story was really confusing if you think about it too much, because of the whole time traveling in the future, and then traveling back in time, and then everything is 50 years in the future, but then you travel back 50 years, and then you actually travel back 20 years. That whole sentence was very confusing, and I made that confusing sentence because it is confusing. The action scenes were really well done, but otherwise the story was plain and it was kind of forgettable. Besides the action scenes, this is why in my opinion this review is so short, because this movie was overall confusing and the only good parts were the action scenes. So what would I rate X-Men Days of Future Past? Well, I would rate this an 8 out of 10. The reason why I rate this that high is because it is a really entertaining movie with some pretty cool effects as well as incredible action scenes. But the reason why I didn't rate this higher was because of the confusing story. Just overall, the whole time travel thing is really not explained well in this movie, and they should have put more time into that aspect. One little thing that I forgot to mention was that Mystique was really weird in this movie. She really went from accepting herself and admitting that humanity won't always accept her to all out wanting to kill people. I get that there's a 10-year time jump and that Trask has killed so many of the people she knew, but she had a lot of knee-jerk reactions in this movie. I will admit that it was a pretty neat aspect of the story where Mystique was basically the main villain of this movie, if you think about it. Overall, this movie really shows how Mystique is actually not very caring for other people. Anyways, that's the end of the review for X-Men Days of Future Past. Thank you all so much for watching, and see you in the next review.